Welcome, friends. Are you sitting comfortably? Good. New England in winter has a particular kind of silence. It's not the peaceful quiet of a summer meadow or the gentle hush of falling snow. No, it's something deeper, a stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting. The forests that blanket the rolling hills of this region have witnessed centuries of history, from Native American settlements to colonial villages, from the witch trials to the Industrial Revolution. But some places in these woods have collected darker memories, holding on to them like frost clinging to dead branches. The Blackwood Hotel sits nestled among ancient pines in a forgotten corner of rural Massachusetts. Built in 1887 by lumber baron Thaddeus Blackwood, it once served as a luxurious retreat for Boston's elite seeking escape from city life. The hotel stands 3 stories tall, its Victorian architecture a testament to a bygone era. Ornate gables, a sprawling wraparound porch, and windows that seem to watch you approach from the winding driveway that stretches nearly 2 miles from the main road. Few travelers find their way to the Blackwood these days. The nearest town is 30 miles away, and GPS signals have a curious habit of failing about halfway down that long, tree-lined drive. Those who do arrive often comment on how the hotel seems larger from the inside than it appears from without, how corridors seem to stretch just a bit too long, how the ceilings feel just a touch too high. This is where Bill and Sarah Matthews found themselves on a bitter January evening in 2023, their headlights cutting through swirling snow as their car crawled up the final stretch of driveway. Bill gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. At 42, his once athletic frame had softened around the middle, and premature gray streaked his dark hair. A software engineer by trade, he'd built a comfortable life for them in Boston. Comfortable, but increasingly empty. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Sarah asked, peering through the windshield at the looming structure. At 39, Sarah still turned heads with her auburn hair and quick smile, though that smile had grown increasingly rare in recent months. Her work as a pediatric nurse had always been her passion, but lately it seemed to drain rather than fulfill her. "It's exactly what we need," Bill replied, not looking at his wife. Quiet, isolated, no distractions. What he didn't say was that this trip was their last resort. 15 years of marriage had slowly eroded into tense silences and separate bedrooms. The counselor had suggested a change of scenery, neutral territory where they might remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. What neither of them knew was that the Blackwood Hotel had witnessed countless marriages before theirs, some that healed within its walls, and many more that splintered apart in ways that left permanent scars on the very fabric of the building. As they pulled up to the entrance, the hotel's facade seemed to shimmer slightly, as though viewed through heat waves, despite the frigid temperature. The front doors swung open before Bill could reach for their luggage, revealing a lobby that glowed with warm light from antique chandeliers. "Welcome to the Blackwood," said a thin woman behind the reception desk. Her name tag read Margaret, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've been expecting you." Sarah frowned. "We only booked this morning. It was a last-minute decision." Margaret's smile remained fixed. "We're always prepared for guests at the Blackwood. You'll be in room 213, second floor, east wing. It has a lovely view of the forest." What she didn't mention was that room 213 had the highest number of reported disturbances of any room in the hotel, or that the east wing had been the site of a tragic fire in 1924 that claimed the lives of 7 guests, all of them couples in troubled marriages. As Margaret handed them their key, an actual brass key, not a modern key card, an elderly man in a faded porter's uniform appeared beside them. "Allow me to assist with your luggage," he said, his voice carrying a hint of an accent that was difficult to place. "I'm Mr. Harris. I've been with the Blackwood for quite some time." There was something comforting about Mr. Harris. Perhaps it was his gentle demeanor or the kindness in his roomy eyes. He moved with surprising strength for a man who appeared to be well into his 80s, effortlessly lifting their suitcases. "The hotel is quiet this time of year," Mr. Harris commented as he led them up a grand staircase. "Just a handful of other guests. You'll have plenty of privacy." Bill and Sarah exchanged a glance. the first moment of genuine connection they'd shared in weeks. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad after all. Room 213 was spacious and elegantly appointed with period furniture. A four-poster bed, a writing desk by the window, a sitting area with a small fireplace already lit and crackling. The bathroom featured a clawfoot tub large enough for two, though neither Bill nor Sarah acknowledged this potential for intimacy. "Dinner is served in the main dining room from 6 until 9, Mr. Harris informed them as he set down their luggage. The hotel has many amenities, a library, a conservatory, even an old billiards room. Feel free to explore, but—" He hesitated, his expression momentarily troubled. "Some areas are undergoing renovation. Best to stick to the main corridors after dark." After Mr. Harris left, Sarah wandered to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape now fading into twilight. "It's beautiful here," she admitted. "Peaceful." Bill nodded, standing awkwardly by the door. "Should we head down for dinner soon?" "I think I'd like to take a bath first," Sarah replied. "It's been a long drive." "Of course, I'll wait for you downstairs. Maybe check out that library Mr. Harris mentioned." As Bill left the room, neither noticed the slight ripple in the air near the closet, nor the way the mirror briefly reflected a room that was not their own, but a much older version of the same space, where a woman in 1920s attire sat weeping at the edge of the bed. The dining room was nearly empty when Bill arrived. Only one other couple sat at a distant table, speaking in hushed tones. They didn't look up when he entered. A server appeared immediately, a young man with unnaturally pale skin and eyes that seemed too dark. "Just one, sir?" he asked. "My wife will be joining me shortly," Bill replied. "Of course, we have a lovely table by the window." As Bill followed the server, he could have sworn the dining room expanded around him. What had appeared to be an intimate space now stretched into a grand hall with at least 30 tables, all empty save for the one occupied by the other couple. The ceiling soared overhead, adorned with intricate moldings that seemed to form faces when viewed from certain angles. The server pulled out a chair for Bill at a table that indeed offered a view, though not of the snowy landscape outside. Instead, the window looked out on the hotel's courtyard, where a fountain stood frozen in the center. Around the fountain, Bill could make out what appeared to be stone figures, though they were difficult to discern clearly in the gathering darkness. "Can I bring you something to drink while you wait?" the server asked. "Scotch, neat," Bill replied, loosening his collar. Despite the snow outside, the dining room felt uncomfortably warm. When the server returned with his drink, Bill asked, "Has this hotel always been here? It seems—" "I don't know. Out of place somehow." The server's expression remained neutral. "The Blackwood has always been here, sir, in one form or another." Before Bill could question this cryptic response, he noticed Sarah entering the dining room. She had changed into a dress he didn't recognize, a simple black number that complemented her figure. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. For a moment, she looked exactly like the woman he had fallen in love with 15 years ago. "You look beautiful," he said as she sat down and meant it. Sarah seemed surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. This place, I don't know. It made me want to make an effort." Dinner progressed with cautious conversation. They discussed safe topics, work, a movie they had both enjoyed months ago, plans for spring. It wasn't the passionate reconnection their counselor had hoped for, but it was civil, even pleasant at times. As they finished their main course, the lights in the dining room flickered briefly. When they stabilized, Bill noticed that the other couple had vanished. In fact, all the tables had been cleared except theirs. The server appeared with dessert menus, seemingly unperturbed. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered. "Where did everyone go?" "What do you mean?" Bill asked. "There was just that one couple, and they probably finished their meal." Sarah frowned. "One couple? Bill, the dining room was at least half full when I came down." Before Bill could respond, a commotion from the kitchen interrupted them. The sound of breaking glass and raised voices. Their server hurried over. "My apologies for the disturbance," he said smoothly. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable continuing your evening in the conservatory? It's particularly lovely at night." As they left the dining room, Bill placed his hand on the small of Sarah's back. a gesture of intimacy he hadn't attempted in months. To his relief, she didn't pull away. The conservatory was a glass-enclosed space filled with lush plants and wicker furniture. Despite the winter chill outside, it was warm and humid within. A gramophone in the corner played soft jazz that sounded like it was being broadcast from another era. "This is nice," Sarah said, settling onto a cushioned bench. "Reminds me of that bed and breakfast in Vermont, our 5th anniversary." Bill smiled at the memory. "You got food poisoning from the oysters. And you stayed up all night bringing me ginger ale and crackers," Sarah added, her expression softening. "You were so patient." For a moment, the years of resentment and distance between them seemed to thin. Bill reached for her hand, and she allowed him to take it. That's when they heard it. A child's laughter, high and clear, coming from somewhere deeper in the conservatory. "Hello," Sarah called, standing up. "Is someone there?" The laughter came again, followed by the sound of small feet running on the stone pathway between the plants. "Probably another guest's child," Bill suggested, though he couldn't remember seeing any families at check-in. Sarah, always drawn to children, followed the sound. "Hello? It's okay. We won't bother you." They wound their way through the foliage, the plants growing denser and more exotic as they progressed. The conservatory seemed much larger from the inside than it had appeared from without. The jazz music faded behind them, replaced by the gentle sound of running water. They emerged into a small clearing centered around a koi pond. Sitting on its edge was a little girl in a white dress, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, her back to them as she trailed her fingers in the water. "Hi there," Sarah said gently. "Are you here with your parents?" The little girl didn't respond or turn around. Bill felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Sarah, maybe we should head back." "Just a second." Sarah moved closer to the child. "Sweetie, are you lost?" As Sarah reached out to touch the girl's shoulder, Mr. Harris appeared suddenly from behind a large fern. "Ah, I see you found the inner garden," he said loudly, stepping between Sarah and the child. "It's quite remarkable, isn't it? Some of these plants date back to the hotel's founding." When Sarah looked back at the pond, the little girl was gone. "Did you see?" she began. "The koi?" Mr. Harris interrupted. "Yes, they're quite special. Descendants of the original fish brought over from Japan in 1890. Bill noticed that Mr. Harris's uniform had changed slightly. It now appeared older, more formal, with brass buttons that gleamed in the dim light. "It's getting late," Mr. Harris continued, guiding them back toward the entrance with gentle insistence. "The conservatory closes at 10. Hotel policy." As they followed him through the winding paths, Bill could have sworn the plants moved slightly, reaching toward them as they passed. When they finally emerged back into the main part of the conservatory, the gramophone was silent and the space was empty. "I think we should go back to our room," Bill said quietly to Sarah. She nodded, her earlier warmth replaced by confusion. Mr. Harris escorted them to the main staircase. "Sleep well," he said, his expression grave. "And remember, stay in your room after midnight. The Blackwood changes after midnight." Before they could question this strange warning, he was gone, disappearing down a service corridor with surprising speed for a man his age. Their room was exactly as they had left it, yet somehow different. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the walls. The bed, which had seemed inviting earlier, now loomed ominously in the center of the room. "What did he mean, the hotel changes?" Sarah asked as she changed into her nightgown in the bathroom. Bill was checking his phone, still no signal. Probably just trying to keep guests from wandering around and disturbing others. When Sarah emerged from the bathroom, she found Bill standing by the window, staring out at the courtyard below. "Sarah, come look at this." In the moonlight, the stone figures around the fountain were clearly visible now. They weren't decorative statues as Bill had assumed. They were human forms, men and women frozen in postures of terror, their faces contorted in silent screams. "Those can't be real," Sarah whispered, pressing her hand against the cold glass. "They're just very realistic sculptures." As they watched, one of the figures, a woman in what appeared to be 1950s attire, slowly turned her head toward the hotel, her stone eyes seeming to look directly up at their window. Sarah gasped and stepped back, bumping into the writing desk. A leather-bound book fell to the floor, opening to reveal yellowed pages covered in frantic handwriting. Bill picked it up. This wasn't here before. The journal belonged to a Jonathan Pierce, dated 1967. The entries described a stay at the Blackwood with his wife, Eleanor. They had come to save their marriage after Jonathan's affair with his secretary. The early entries were hopeful, noting the hotel's charm and the helpful staff, particularly an elderly porter named Harris, who had been extraordinarily accommodating. But as the entries progressed, Jonathan's writing grew increasingly disturbed. He described seeing people from different time periods in the hallways, Eleanor insisting there were voices coming from the walls, the hotel expanding and contracting like a living thing. The final entry, dated February 17, 1967, read simply, "Harris says we must leave before midnight. Eleanor won't come. She says they're calling to her from the courtyard. God help me, I can hear them too." "This is someone's idea of a joke," Bill said, closing the book. "Probably left by the previous guests." But Sarah was already opening the closet, where she had hung her clothes earlier. Instead of her carefully arranged outfits, the closet now contained women's clothing from various decades. A flapper dress from the 1920s, a poodle skirt from the 1950s, a hippie-style maxi dress from the 1970s. "Bill," she whispered, "these aren't mine." The bathroom door, which had been ajar, slowly swung closed with a soft click. The lock turned. "Very funny, Sarah," Bill said, though his voice trembled slightly. "I'm right here," Sarah replied from beside the closet. From behind the bathroom door came the sound of water filling the tub, followed by soft, mournful humming. Bill approached the door cautiously. "Hello? Is someone in there?" The humming stopped. A woman's voice, barely audible, responded, "Henry, is that you, Henry? You promised you wouldn't leave me again." Bill tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "We need to call the front desk," he said, reaching for the rotary phone on the nightstand. When he picked up the receiver, instead of a dial tone, he heard a man's voice. "She'll never forgive you, you know, not after what you did." Bill slammed the phone down. "We're leaving. Now." As they grabbed their essential belongings, the room's temperature plummeted. Their breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. The fire, which had been dying, roared back to life with unnatural blue flames that cast no heat. The bathroom door swung open, revealing not their modern bathroom, but an older version with black and white tiles and a clawfoot tub filled with dark water. A pale arm hung limply over the edge. "Don't look," Bill said, pulling Sarah toward the door. But when he turned the handle, it came off in his hand, the mechanism inside rusted and broken. "The window," Sarah suggested, her voice shaking. But the window now showed a different view. Not the courtyard with its frozen fountain and stone figures, but a sheer drop down a cliff face that hadn't been there when they arrived. A knock at the door made them both jump. "Mr. and Mrs. Matthews?" It was Mr. Harris's voice. "May I come in? I believe you may be experiencing some irregularities with your room." Bill looked at Sarah, who nodded frantically. "Yes, please, come in," he called. The door swung open easily from the outside. Mr. Harris stood in the hallway, his porter's uniform now clearly from another era, early 1900s by the look of it. His face was grave. "I was afraid of this," he said, stepping into the room. "The Blackwood has chosen you." "Chosen us?" Sarah repeated. "What are you talking about? What is happening?" Mr. Harris sighed heavily. "The Blackwood Hotel exists in many times at once. It was built on land that was special, sacred to some, cursed to others. Those who come here with troubled hearts, particularly couples whose bonds are fraying, attract the hotel's attention." "That's insane," Bill said, though he couldn't deny the evidence of his own eyes as the room continued to shift subtly around them, the wallpaper pattern changing, the furniture rearranging itself. "The hotel feeds on discord," Mr. Harris continued. "It amplifies the cracks in relationships until they shatter completely. Then it collects the pieces." He gestured toward the window, which now showed the courtyard again, with its frozen figures around the fountain. "Those are all former guests?" Sarah asked, horror dawning on her face. Mr. Harris nodded solemnly. couples who couldn't find their way back to each other. The hotel separated them, turned them against each other, and when their bonds were completely severed— "Why are you telling us this?" Bill demanded. "Why help us at all?" A sad smile crossed Mr. Harris's weathered face. "Because I made a terrible mistake once. In 1912, I was the head porter here. My wife, Elizabeth, and I had been fighting for months. I was unfaithful, you see. We came to stay here, in this very room, to try to save our marriage." He moved to the window, gazing down at the courtyard. "I didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. Elizabeth, she's still down there, second from the left, in the dress with the high collar." Bill and Sarah joined him at the window. Sure enough, among the stone figures was a woman in Edwardian dress, her face frozen in an expression of betrayal rather than fear. "I've been trying to atone ever since," Mr. Harris continued. "The hotel keeps me here, but it can't make me part of its collection because my heart still belongs to Elizabeth. So I try to warn others, to help them escape before midnight." Midnight? Sarah glanced at the bedside clock. It was 11:37 p.m. At midnight, the hotel seals itself completely. All exits disappear. The only way out is through the main doors, but only if you go together, with your bond intact. "How do we get to the main doors?" Bill asked, already gathering their belongings. "Follow me," Mr. Harris said. "And whatever you see or hear, remember, it's the hotel trying to separate you. Don't let go of each other's hands, no matter what." As they stepped into the hallway, Bill was shocked to see that it no longer resembled the corridor they had walked through earlier. It now stretched impossibly long in both directions, with dozens of doors lining each side. The wallpaper shifted between patterns from different eras, and the light fixtures flickered between gas lamps, early electric bulbs, and modern sconces. "This way," Mr. Harris said, turning left. "And hurry, we have less than 20 minutes." They followed him down the corridor, which seemed to elongate with each step. Doors opened as they passed, revealing glimpses of rooms from different time periods occupied by guests who shouldn't exist. From one room came the sounds of a heated argument, a man accusing his wife of infidelity. From another, the quiet sobs of a woman sitting alone on a bed strewn with photographs. A third revealed a couple standing in silence on opposite sides of the room, the distance between them more vast than the physical space would suggest. "Don't look," Mr. Harris warned. "The hotel is showing you its collection, its trophies." But Sarah couldn't help glancing into one room as they passed. Inside, she saw herself, or a version of herself, packing a suitcase while Bill slept in the bed behind her. The Sarah in the room looked up, meeting the real Sarah's eyes, and mouthed, "He'll never change. Leave while you can." "Sarah?" Bill's voice pulled her back. "Stay with me." She squeezed his hand tighter and hurried on. As they descended the grand staircase, the hotel's transformations became more dramatic. The lobby below shifted rapidly between eras, the elegant Victorian splendor of its opening in 1887, the Jazz Age opulence of the 1920s, the faded grandeur of the 1950s, all the way to its modern incarnation. And with each shift, the lobby was populated with different guests and staff, all going about their business as if the temporal distortions were perfectly normal. None seemed to notice the trio descending the stairs. "They're echoes," Mr. Harris explained, "moments captured by the hotel, played on an endless loop." As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the main doors came into view, massive oak portals with brass fittings. They seemed to be the only constant element in the shifting lobby. "There," Mr. Harris pointed, "that's your way out." But as they started toward the doors, the lobby settled into a single time period, the present day. Margaret from the reception desk stood blocking their path, her formerly pleasant demeanor replaced by cold hostility. "Leaving so soon, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews?" she asked. "But you haven't experienced all the Blackwood has to offer." Behind her appeared the other staff members they had encountered, the dining room server, the maid who had turned down their beds, the bartender from the lounge. All wore the same expression of malevolent disapproval. "They're not real," Mr. Harris said firmly. "They're manifestations of the hotel itself." Margaret's face contorted with anger. "You've interfered for the last time, Harris." She turned to Bill and Sarah. "He's lying to you. There is no escape. The Blackwood is your home now, as it is his. Don't listen, Mr. Harris urged. Keep moving toward the doors. As they tried to step around Margaret, the lobby began to transform again. But this time, not into another era of the hotel. Instead, it became a courtroom. Bill found himself in the witness stand, facing a judge with Sarah's face but empty, black eyes where hers should be. William Matthews, the judge intoned, you stand accused of emotional abandonment, of prioritizing work over your marriage, of letting your love wither through neglect. How do you plead? Simultaneously, Sarah found herself in what appeared to be a hospital room. In a bed lay Bill, unresponsive and connected to various machines. A doctor with Mr. Harris's face stood beside her. He's been asking for you, the doctor said. In his delirium, he keeps saying he's sorry, that he should have tried harder, but you never came. For 3 weeks, you never came. It's not real. Mr. Harris's voice cut through both illusions. Find each other. Remember what matters. Bill felt Sarah's hand slipping from his as the courtroom scene became more vivid, more convincing. The judge was reading a list of his failings as a husband, some real, some exaggerated, some completely fabricated. But within each accusation was a kernel of truth that made him doubt himself, doubt his worthiness of Sarah's love. In her hospital room illusion, Sarah was being shown charts and records, evidence that she had abandoned Bill in his time of need, that she had been cold and unforgiving when he had reached out for reconciliation. I wouldn't do that, she whispered, but her conviction was wavering. Sarah! Bill's voice reached her, distant but determined. Remember Vermont. Remember the oysters. The simple, genuine memory. Bill bringing her crackers and ginger ale, sitting beside her all night, holding her hair back when she was sick, cut through the hotel's illusion like a beam of light through fog. Bill, she called back, focusing on his hand in hers, which she could still faintly feel despite the convincing hospital room around her. I'm here, he responded. I've always been here, even when I didn't show it well. The illusions began to flicker and fade as they focused on each other, on the real memories they shared, both good and bad, but authentic in a way the hotel's manipulations could never be. The doors! Mr. Harris shouted. It's almost midnight! Through the dissolving illusions, they could see the main doors just yards away. The hotel staff manifestations were converging to block their path, their forms shifting between human appearances and something darker, more amorphous. Run! Mr. Harris commanded, placing himself between them and the approaching entities. I'll hold them off. Hand in hand, Bill and Sarah sprinted for the doors. Behind them, Mr. Harris seemed to glow with a soft light as he faced the hotel's manifestations. You've taken enough, they heard him say. Not these two. Not tonight. As they reached the doors, Bill hesitated. We can't just leave him. Mr. Harris turned to them, smiling sadly. I told you I'm atoning. Now go, before it's too late. The grandfather clock in the lobby began to chime. Midnight. With a final look at Mr. Harris, Bill pushed open the heavy doors, and he and Sarah stumbled out into the snowy night. Behind them, the doors slammed shut with such force that icicles fell from the eaves above. They ran to their car, not stopping until they were both inside with the doors locked. Bill's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys. Look, Sarah whispered, pointing back at the hotel. In one of the upper windows, room 213, they realized, stood Mr. Harris. He raised his hand in farewell, then slowly faded from view. As he disappeared, all the lights in the Blackwood Hotel went out, plunging the building into darkness. The engine roared to life, and Bill didn't hesitate, accelerating down the long driveway as fast as he dared on the snow-covered surface. Neither spoke until they reached the main road, the hotel no longer visible behind them. Do you think he'll be okay? Sarah finally asked. Bill reached for her hand. I don't know, but I think he found some peace in helping us. They drove in silence for several miles, processing what they had experienced. The hotel had forced them to confront the fractures in their relationship, the neglect, the resentment, the failure to communicate. But in doing so, it had also reminded them of what had once bound them together. I don't want to lose you, Bill said at last. I know I haven't been the husband you deserved these past few years. Sarah squeezed his hand. And I've been holding on to hurts instead of telling you what I needed. We both let things slip away. Can we start again? He asked. Really try this time? I'd like that, she replied softly. As dawn broke over the New England landscape, they stopped at a small diner for coffee. While waiting for their order, Sarah used the diner's Wi-Fi to search for information about the Blackwood Hotel. What she found chilled her despite the warmth of the diner. According to every source, the Blackwood Hotel had burned to the ground in 1967. The fire had started in room 213, claiming the lives of a couple named Jonathan and Eleanor Pierce. Among the few survivors was a maintenance man who claimed to have been trying to help guests escape. His name was not recorded, but witnesses described him as an elderly gentleman who seemed to know the hotel's layout impossibly well. The site where the hotel had stood remained vacant, with multiple attempts to rebuild or develop the land mysteriously failing over the decades. Locals avoided the area, claiming it was haunted. But we were just there, Bill said, looking over her shoulder at the article. We stayed the night. Sarah showed him the next search result, a local news story from just 1 week earlier. A Boston couple experiencing marital difficulties had gone missing after telling friends they were heading to a remote hotel for the weekend. Their car had been found abandoned on a rural road near where the Blackwood had once stood. The search was ongoing, but authorities were not optimistic given the harsh winter conditions. We need to tell someone, Bill said. Maybe those people are still alive, still trapped in there somehow. But as he reached for his phone, he noticed something on their receipt. Written in faded ink at the bottom was a message. Some doors, once closed, should remain so. H. Bill and Sarah exchanged a look of understanding. Whatever the Blackwood Hotel was, a ghost, a portal between times, or something else entirely, it existed beyond the reach of conventional authorities. Mr. Harris was still there, still trying to help those he could, still atoning for whatever had happened between him and Elizabeth all those years ago. They left the diner and continued driving, putting more distance between themselves and the hotel that shouldn't exist. The experience had changed them, forced them to see each other, really see each other, for the first time in years. As they crossed the state line, Sarah rested her head on Bill's shoulder. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," he replied simply. "The long way." Behind them, in the forests of New England, the Blackwood Hotel waited in its impossible existence, its windows dark, its doors closed to the world of the living. And somewhere within its shifting corridors, Mr. Harris continued his endless vigil, watching for troubled couples who might need his help to escape the hotel's hungry embrace before they joined its grim collection in the courtyard below.
I am coming for you.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.